Hello everyone, welcome to my channel PhD Chats. You clicked on the link when you did not have to, and for that I am grateful. Every time you watch a video, you support my channel, and every comment and every interaction allows YouTube to show my video to more and more people. So if a little bit of this video was interesting and it kept your attention, then there might be more people out there with the same sentiment. So if you interact with it, then YouTube shows it to others. So please like, comment, share. I am so excited to see your engagement with the video. Today, I am going to talk about my own experience with bias, a bias that I held. Stay tuned. So if you are new to my channel, you may not have seen this video where I introduced myself to my viewers. So if you are new here, I want you to go and take a look at that video. It will tell you all about me. Some of what I will share about my background I may have mentioned in the video, but I would love you to go take a look. And if you have a question or a comment, please leave it, like, subscribe, and interact with the video. So today I'm going to tell you a story about how I uncovered and came to the realization that I was holding on to a bias based simply on misinformation. So I'm an immigrant, proud immigrant. I was born, raised on the amazing island Trinidad and Tobago, the Twin Island, and I moved to the US in 1997. So that was the age before Facebook, and it was the age before Instagram, and before we were able to be global citizens and have the entire world at our fingertips because of our smartphones. When I left Trinidad, the ethnic makeup of my country was primarily Afro-Trinidadians, who are the descendants of the Atlantic slave trade, and Indo-Trinidadians, who are the descendants of indentured laborers who came to replace the workforce after slavery was abolished. And those two ethnic groups made up about 90% of the island's population. The other 10% was a mix of Asian. We have a Chinese presence in Trinidad. We also have a Middle Eastern, we have a Syrian population, and we have other individuals who identify as European or white. When I moved to New York City, the cultural epicenter of the world, I saw people of so many different ethnic groups I had never seen. Someone who was South American. I remember seeing people on the train and wondering, oh, interesting that this person said, well, I am Puerto Rican, or I am Dominican, or I am Mexican, or I'm Ecuadorian. I become more familiar and more culturally aware. And so now I can make differentiations between groups of people, right? But prior to that, outside of the groups I described in Trinidad, I had not had interactions with people outside of that. And I met a friend of mine who is Korean. He also emigrated to the United States. He also saw the first person of color when he landed in JFK. So we would always joke and laugh about, the fact that we thought we were interacting with so much diversity, but we were not until we got to New York. I also did not interact with people who were Jewish American, right? Who were ethnically Jewish Americans. The very first time I would have interacted with a person who identifies ethnically as Jewish American would have been right here in Brooklyn, New York. So I was driving with a family friend, and we were going downtown Brooklyn to run some errands. And we were driving along Eastern Parkway. We were maybe 2 cars away from the crosswalk. And we saw a couple of people run across. Could have been like a young man and 2 young children. And so they ran across the street. There was oncoming traffic, but they did not have the walk sign. And somebody made the comment and said, and that's so dangerous, who would take a chance on Eastern Parkway? And the driver said, oh, that's typical here. Those are Jewish people, and they are all married to their cousins. And because of that, they present with, mental disabilities, or they are not fully mentally present. And so the way that's demonstrated is that they make really risky decisions about how they cross the street. When you're driving along Eastern Parkway, you're going to see them running across the street in and out of traffic. I had been in the country for about 6 months at that time. We were in a car. It was said casually, and I had just seen three people run across the street in a fashion that I would consider risky. And so all of those things together solidified, and a bias was born. I had no reason to question what I was told because I had nothing to compare it to. Plus, I'm seeing it in front of me, so it's like confirmation bias. It was said and it was immediately confirmed. And that lived in the back of my head for years. I did not know. Now, living in Brooklyn, right? New York City is not a melting pot. New York City is a salad bowl, meaning that there are very clearly defined pockets of groups of people and cultures. You can drive to parts of New York City, you will see an Haitian American population. There's little Caribbean, there's Russian Americans, there are Chinese Americans, there are Italian Americans, there are Polish Americans, there are groups, places in Brooklyn alone that you can see very clear ethnic clusters. So New York City is, in a sense, very segregated. There are streets that you can cross and the makeup of people will instantly change. So living in New York City, it's very easy if you work in a space and you live somewhere else that you kind of get just locked into very continuous, specific patterns of travel and movement. So it's very easy to interact with people that look like you and not really encounter people from different cultures. And it sounds crazy, but it's not impossible. I remember the first Hispanic friend I made, and she said, "Oh, my grandmother doesn't speak any Spanish." And I said, "Oh my goodness, did she just move here?" And she said, "No, she's been living in New York for 45 years. And I said, "What? How does she live?" Until you learn that you can actually exist is where everyone around you speaks your native language. You don't have to venture out or interact with other cultures than yours. I was pretty young. I was about 18, 19, 20 at that time. I had a very specific route. I lived in Brooklyn. I commuted to work in the city. I hung out with my friends. And so, the movement was consistent. I'm mentioning that because I did not have any reason to interact with anybody that was Jewish American. I had no opportunity. I had no friends, and some of the practices around that culture doesn't really allow for too much integration anyway. So fast forward, remember that little bias just lives in the back of our mind, and I want us to keep that in mind because so many of us may be holding on to stereotypes about other cultures that we don't even know until we express them or something comes that we experience that causes us to challenge those belief systems. I became a driver. And so again, moving around Crown Heights, I was driving down Eastern Parkway. Now, I had forgotten that conversation. Your brain is a very interesting organ, right? There's so many memories and experiences that live in different parts of our memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. So I had not thought of that conversation I had had 3 to 4 years ago. So I'm driving down Eastern Parkway and I was headed to the Brooklyn Museum, and the light was red for the motorist. And so I'm there. I was the first person at the light. And right when the light turned green, 2 boys just ran across the street. And I hit my brake, and then, I'm not sure if the other drivers reacted, but it shocked me. They ran really fast. And so I thought, oh my God, it's true. That statement that someone made is true, that they're not really fully conscious of what's happening around them. And just like that bias was confirmed. So now I am looking at a group of people through a lens that is misinformed, that is inaccurate, and I am not having any experiences to dispel those. A few years later, I was working at a very reputable department store in Midtown Manhattan, and I was a floor manager. I had a friend that worked in operations, and he would come to the floor, and he was a cool guy. We would just chat, talk about the business, talk about life. And I remember it could have been October, some of the Jewish holidays were approaching. So we were talking about some sales that were coming up and it was going to be fairly busy in the store. And he said, well, I won't be here. And I said, why not? He said, I won't be here for 2 days because it's a Jewish holiday. And I said, oh, really? You're Jewish? And he said, yeah, my family is Jewish. So I said, oh my God, tell me, because do you go to the synagogue? I knew enough about Jewish culture at that point. I mean, I wasn't unaware of everything. I knew, what their places of worship were. And as a Christian, we often made references to Jews as they are described in the Bible, right? I was very curious, right? So I said, well, tell me about that. And he said, I don't go. My mom goes sometimes, my dad a little bit more. And I was confused, right? Because again, I'm trying to put the whole thing together. When you say Jewish, are you saying ethnically Jewish or you're religiously Jewish? He's like, no, I'm just going to play the Jew card. Said it very loosely. And I'm just going to take the days off because I can, And he was such a great person, excellent work ethic, really liked him. Great personality. Just kind of, sometimes you're working and you kind of want to break the routine of work and someone just stops by, you chat for a few minutes. And it was very refreshing and I considered him a work friend. And all the while that he was talking to me, I was trying to figure out why he was different. Like, why wasn't he not, mentally incoherent? Like, why wasn't he running around crazy? Like, why was he a normal, regular guy? I was wondering, well, maybe he was adopted or maybe he didn't grow up with his parents. I was so confused because this isn't the presentation of what you're supposed to be if you identify as Jewish. And it sounds crazy when I tell the story, but that is the absolute truth. He would be talking to me and I would be like wondering, how did he become this way? He's not dressed that way. He just looks very normal. He's wearing a suit. He's a cool, regular guy. And of course, following that and, just being more intentional about learning about the cultures in New York and understanding how much of a stereotype that was. And just your eyes being open to the difference between the religion and the ethnicity and the different factions and the belief systems, and just understanding how dangerous stereotypes can be and how often they are based on misinformation or non-information. I have had such positive experiences with people of all ethnicities in my time here in New York, including Jewish Americans, co-workers, people I've done business with. And imagine going into those experiences, holding on to something that was so terribly inaccurate and untrue. So I make sure to keep that experience in my mind when I encounter people who are holding on, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to their bias about different groups. What positive experiences have you had around people to balance all the information that you're being given by the media, by advertising, which is where a lot of those stereotypes are informed and are solidified, and we continually see these images, and then we hear people that we should trust to be impartial and balanced, like our politicians, make statements that further solidify these negative perspectives about people. And so that was my learning experience. I am always grateful that I remember my moments of not being informed so I can see the learning curve and see my growth. So that allows me to have some empathy for people that make statements to me, and say, well, you're different. You're a little different than, other African Americans or other people of color, because people are uninformed about Afro-Caribbeans. They're not aware of Caribbean culture. If you step out of this, very diverse metropolitan area and you just drive out of state, a few states over, do not have the opportunity to interact with someone who's Afro-Caribbean, or they're not willing to learn and to inform themselves. So part of our learning is to make sure that we are looking at things holistically and that we are not painting any group of people with a broad brush. It's not an us and them situation. and also to embrace the idea that stereotypes are not untruths. They are truths in some cases, but for a small percentage of a population of people. And there are positive and negative stereotypes. And sometimes we kind of harp on those negative stereotypes about people. We unintentionally, or sometimes with malicious intent, lean into the idea that most of the people in that group are like that. So in the climate that we are in, I wanted to share the idea that growth can happen. And in the same way, just little statements, that little statement that someone made, and that small moment that I had that confirmed the bias that was planted in my mind because there was nothing there. There was no information, there was no positive experiences with people that were outside or part of that group, so that I could say that's no, that isn't true. When someone makes a negative statement about a group, say that isn't actually accurate because of this experience. Those words are not, they're a little bit inflammatory. That would be, it's unfair to say because I know this. And those retorts can be uncomfortable, especially if the person that's making them is someone we care about and we don't want them to feel attacked, or we don't want to seem like we are, being too woke. Because in the car that I was sitting in that day, had someone said, "Oh no, that's just, once in a while, everybody does that. Everybody jaywalks and takes a chance with the traffic." Be aware of your biases. Be intentionally anti-racist. Ensure that you are listening for opportunities to highlight and celebrate people that are different than you are, and that there is no malice and ill will and oppressive, intentionally discriminatory statements being made about entire groups of people. And you understand that people's choices and their behaviors are not a product of their ethnicity, that many of the behaviors that we assign to specific groups of people are actually human problems. They're things that humans do and not things that this one group of people are guilty of, and everybody of that ethnicity is. And let's have more appreciation and celebration and curiosity, and just opening your eyes to the understanding that people see the world different than you do, and that's okay. That's the beauty of who we are. And it's okay to disagree. And it doesn't mean I hate you, I diminish your worth, and I take opportunities to mistreat you or to bar you from having the full experiences, especially those of us in positions of power. Those of us who are educators in healthcare, people that work in HR, those of us that are shaping the lives or having very impactful interactions with others that are meaningful and important. We have to be very responsible about how we look at other groups and really evaluate our thinking and our biases, and inform yourself and be intentionally anti-racist, anti-prejudice, anti-discriminatory, and inform yourself so that we are being kinder and more appreciative of each other. So wanted to share my story of growth, and I would like to hear from you in the comments. Is there any realization about a group of people, or about your own decisions or your own choices that you made, that you would like to share in the comments to help us all grow and be better people? Thank you so much for watching.